You've been the victim. You've been the villain. And yeah, you probably played the hero too. Same relationship. Same family. Sometimes the same argument. Here's the wild part. Psychologists mapped this out over 50 years ago and explains almost every messy relationship you've ever been in. The toxic ex, the family group chat that always ends in chaos, the coworker drama that never actually resolves. There are only 3 roles. Everybody's played all 3. And I bet money you already know which one you default to. You're just not ready to hear it yet. Today I'm breaking down the Karpman Drama Triangle. Victim, rescuer, persecutor. The exact psychological loop keeping toxic relationships, dysfunctional families, and workplace chaos running on repeat. By the end of this video, you're going to see this everywhere. Your DMs, your family texts, your last relationship, and you're finally going to know how to get off the ride. This isn't TikTok psychology. The psychiatrist named Stephen Karpman mapped this out in 1968, and therapists are still using it today because it's still exactly right. Stick around for role number 3. It's the one that looks like you're the good guy. It's the one nobody wants to admit they're playing. And it might be doing more damage than the other 2 combined. Here's the twist this whole video is built on. This isn't good people versus bad people. It's roles. And people swap between all 3, sometimes in the same conversation. The victim in one sentence becomes a villain in the next. The hero trying to help? Sometimes they're the one keeping everybody stuck. Nobody's locked into one seat here. That's exactly why it's so hard to catch yourself doing it. Let's start with the role you already know. The victim role isn't the same thing as being an actual victim of real harm. That distinction matters. So hold on to it. This is a stance, a way of relating to conflict. Poor me, nothing I do matters. There's nothing I can do about this. And the function of that stance, however real the underlying pain is that it removes the requirement to act. If a situation is framed as completely outside your control, you're relieved of the discomfort trying to change it, and you're also protected from the risk of trying and failing. That's why this role is so hard to leave, even for people who know, somewhere in the back of their mind, that they're stuck in it. As long as your position is powerless, no attempt is required and no attempt can fail. It's real emotional protection, bought at the cost of real agency. Picture someone who describes their job, their relationships, their whole financial situation as things that just happen to them. I always get the short end of the stick. Nothing ever works out for me. And when a friend offers an actual, concrete suggestion, it gets met with an immediate yes, but a reason it won't work, delivered before it's even been tried. That's not dishonesty about the pain. It's a structure that quietly makes sure the pain continues. Now, here's the role most people think of first when they hear the word manipulator. The persecutor. Critical, blaming, controlling, quick to find fault. And in a lot of relationships, that's an accurate description of one specific person. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. The persecutor role can be occupied by anyone, including someone who spends most of their time playing victim. The second their patience finally runs out. That explains a pattern you've probably seen and never had a name for. Someone feels chronically unheard, chronically unappreciated, solidly parked in the victim seat for weeks, and then, after enough resentment piles up, they explode. Sharp, blaming, critical over something small. And almost immediately afterward, they slide right back into guilt, back into poor me. I don't know what came over me, framing the outburst as something that just happened to them rather than a role they actively stepped into. Picture a parent who's felt unheard for weeks and then snaps at a minor mistake with way more force than the moment called for. That harshness didn't come from nowhere. It came from a long stretch of unaddressed resentment finally boiling over, and it's usually followed by exactly the retreat back into victim you'd expect. So, victim protects you from the risk of trying and failing. Persecutor is what happens when the resentment underneath that protection finally cracks. Now, here's the one I promised you. The one almost nobody suspects. The rescuer looks, on the surface, like the healthiest seat at this table. Helpful, generous, always available to fix things for someone else. But therapists have identified the rescuer as frequently just as dysfunctional as the other 2, for a specific reason. Rescuing isn't the same thing as genuinely helpful support. It's help that wasn't asked for. Help that isn't really about what the other person actually needs. Help that quietly sends a message that the person being helped can't handle things on their own. That distinction matters enormously. Real support respects the other person's capability. Rescuing, underneath it, is often about meeting the rescuer's own needs, to feel needed, to feel in control, to avoid a harder truth about the relationship by staying busy solving smaller, more manageable problems instead. And here's the tell. Watch what happens when the person being rescued doesn't want to help or starts handling something on their own. A genuinely healthy helper feels relief, maybe even pride. A rescuer often feels something closer to anxiety, sometimes even resentment, which is a pretty clear sign the helping was never entirely about the other person to begin with. Think about someone who's been quietly solving a family member's problems for years, paying their bills, smoothing over their conflicts, making excuses for them to other people, long after that family member has shown they can handle some of it themselves. When that person finally starts managing something independently, the rescuer doesn't feel proud. They feel unsettled, almost irritated. That's the tell. The rescuing was serving a need to feel indispensable more than it was ever serving the other person's actual growth. I want to be honest about why this one matters so much. Of all three roles, the rescuer is the one people are least willing to look at honestly in themselves, because it's the one that feels the most like being a good person. And that reluctance is exactly what keeps it running. Here's what makes this whole thing genuinely useful, and not just three interesting labels. This framework explains why the same dysfunctional relationship can run for years without ever fully resolving. The triangle sustains itself because nobody stays in one seat. A rescuer eventually gets exhausted from doing all the emotional labor and snaps into persecutor. The person they've been helping, now criticized instead of supported, collapses into victim. And the original persecutor, faced with someone else falling apart, sometimes steps in to manage the fallout and becomes the new rescuer. Nobody stays still long enough for the actual issue, usually a mismatch of needs or resentment that never got named honestly, to get resolved. The roles just keep trading hands. Picture a workplace where one manager is chronically overwhelmed victim, and a coworker keeps quietly covering their work without being asked, rescuer, until that coworker, worn out and unacknowledged, starts publicly criticizing the manager's competence. Persecutor. And the manager, now under public criticism, doubles down on feeling targeted and unsupported. Back to victim. Every single person in that sequence can accurately describe their own experience of it. None of them are positioned to see the whole rotating structure they're all keeping alive together. So, how do you actually get off it? The most useful thing this framework offers isn't just a diagnosis. It's an alternative for each seat. Instead of victim, the healthier position is something closer to vulnerable, being honest about real difficulty, without giving up the belief that action is still possible. Instead of persecutor, it's assertive, naming a boundary or a concern directly, without the blame attached. And instead of rescuer, it's something closer to genuinely supportive, offering help that's actually been asked for, and trusting the other person's capability instead of quietly undermining it. The practical version is simpler than the theory. Before you act, in any of the three original roles, pause and ask one question. Is this response actually about addressing what's happening, or is it about avoiding something uncomfortable by falling into a role that already feels familiar? That single pause, asked honestly, is often enough to interrupt the automatic rotation long enough for something genuinely different to happen instead. One of the clearest shifts people describe is a rescuer learning to ask, before stepping in, did they actually ask for this? And finding out, more often than they expected, that the honest answer is no. Here's what ties all three of these roles together, including the one that looks the most virtuous. Every single one of them is a way of avoiding the same uncomfortable thing: direct, honest engagement with an actual problem. The victim avoids the risk of trying. The persecutor avoids naming what they need calmly, so it comes out as blame instead. The rescuer avoids sitting with someone else's struggle without immediately fixing it, because tolerating that discomfort is harder than just acting to relieve it. None of these roles make someone a bad person. They're deeply human ways of managing discomfort that, left unexamined, can keep an entire relationship or family running the same exhausting loop for years. Naming your own default role, not to judge yourself for it, but to actually see it clearly is very often the first real step off the triangle entirely. Video. So be honest with yourself for a second. Which role did you recognize the most? Victim, persecutor, or rescuer? I'd genuinely like to know in the comments, and I suspect a lot of you are going to recognize more than one. You don't have to keep rotating through roles that were never really about solving anything in the first place. Stepping off the triangle starts with something small, just being willing to notice which corner you're actually standing in right now. Subscribe for more breakdowns like this one, and I'll see you in the next video.